Welcome back to Conservative Conversations. I'm your host, Reid.
And I'm Frank.
And today we're going to get into a couple rapid-fire topics that have been happening in the news since we last recorded. First off is going to be the Brittney Griner trade for the Merchant of Death, also known as Victor Boot or Bout. I've heard it pronounced a couple different ways. I think that is a pretty big deal because you want to know what it immediately reminds me of?
What's that?
The Bo Bergdahl trade during the Obama administration.
Well, I think some of the same people are pulling
you're right.
The strings.
That's kind of what I believe too. And,
you know what I think of?
Yeah.
Merchant of Death?
Yeah.
Makes me think Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare.
Oh.
That's what I always think. So anytime this comes up, I think, oh, that Shakespeare guy. What is he again? I have to think about it. I'm like, it's like the Shakespeare title.
Uh-huh.
Merchant of Death.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't think that was a very smart trade.
Not at all.
Well, and plus I saw something where they did, somebody did an analysis of, like, all the trades that we've done with Russia, like, since the Cold War.
Uh-huh.
And, like, we used to do, like, really smart trades and, like, only ever so often.
Right.
But now you get up to modernity and we're, like, trading people for Pez dispensers back and forth. You know, like, it's nothing. We just trade for nothing now. I mean, you could look at this one.
Right.
Was this very strategic?
Not at all. I mean, like most people have said, I'm glad we at least brought an American home. I mean, we always want to bring them home, but they could have done better.
Well, I sort of feel differently about it because I've also seen some information out there. I mean, I'm sure it's easily proven, even though I don't have, I'm not prepared in a sense, to quote stuff.
Right.
But from my understanding, she's traveled extensively around Russia. She's been to Russia plenty. She knows the laws. I feel like it's the same thing here. If you go taking, a truckload full of marijuana into Ohio, that's going to be against the law, right? You're probably going to wind up in jail. Well, she did that, except instead of going across to a different state, she went into a different country.
Right.
And I sort of want to say, tough titties. And you knew what you were doing. And I feel like extradition should be more important. That should be reserved. If we're going to do such trades, trade a war criminal for one of our people, the idea to me is that they're being punished for something in Russia that we don't punish people for. That's where we'd step in and want to save somebody because they wouldn't face that crime at home.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think I've actually heard anybody say that. That's a pretty good point.
I think it's a really good point,
yeah.
And it makes sense. I mean,
Totally.
It should be reserved for saving somebody's life, not just, oh, okay, we'll trade you, I've got 6 pieces of bubble gum for your $1. Whatever. It shouldn't just be these willy-nilly trades. That's not the point.
Right. What I heard from an episode of Matt Walsh, his show that he done around the time of this, where he was talking about there's another guy over there who was also arrested for having marijuana, and he had it for medical reasons because he had like a really terrible back problem.
Yeah.
And they sent him to a labor camp.
Well, see, I agree with you. But see, that one doesn't get the attention.
Right.
But I still would fall, because, I'm sort of a black and white thinker.
Sure.
I still would fall on, well, you shouldn't have had it then.
Right,
Take ibuprofen for the 3 days you're going to be in Russia or whatever.
Right.
If it's against the law to use marijuana, I mean, we're talking about a whole different kettle of fish.
Sure.
You don't just walk over there and say, I'm an American citizen and I was prescribed this by a doctor.
Right.
They'd laugh in your face. So, but I understand 100% what you're talking about, what you're saying, you know.
Yeah.
And she only gets this preferential treatment. That's what you'd have to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Preferential treatment.
Right. Yeah. It's it was a terrible trade. I mean, it's not like, they call it a 1-for-1 trade, but one of the ones is like, it's not an equal 1-to-1.
Not at all.
And that didn't even make any sense.
Well, and plus, like I said, if you go back and look, we used to make smart trades. Right. And we're America. We'd trade like 10 of our people for a terrorist. Mm-hmm. Not 1-for-1. That's crazy. That only happens now in modernity. That didn't used to happen.
Right. Well, I'll go ahead and tease now. This whole situation makes me think about something I'll bring up when we do our annual predictions episode. So stay tuned for that, listeners.
Yeah.
It has to do with foreign policy and stuff like that, and I think it further weakens our the way the rest of the
our image.
Our image amongst the world stage.
Right. The power we project.
Right.
Whatever.
Exactly.
All that. Yeah.
Well, before we move on to our next topic, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, and many other platforms. You can also follow us on Twitter at contempconserv.
Yes, and if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure and like the video because that helps us with the algorithm. And if you could suggest this to any of your friends or anybody else you think might be interested, we would certainly appreciate that.
Right. And next, one of the things that happened is the Supreme Court heard oral arguments on a religious freedom case that originated out of Colorado. There's this lady, I forget her name, but the lady had a wedding website, and a gay couple wanted her to make a website for their wedding, but she, being a Christian, did not want to do that. So of course they had a lawsuit in Colorado, which is pretty, I wouldn't know how to say it, like not strict, broad. Okay, broad's actually what they have, a broad public accommodations policy, I believe. Mm-hmm. Because we've seen similar cases like this from Colorado. The bakery. The Masterpiece Cake Shop. The gentleman who owns that has been sued a couple different times. His first case was for a same-sex wedding, and then I think later somebody wanted him to make like a transgender reveal cake or something like that. Something transgender related.
Yeah.
And so they sued him again. So we've seen cases like this before out of Colorado. And one of the things that's related to this that I don't think a lot of people I've heard make a point of is with these same, people who are demanding like the same-sex marriage cakes, the transgender cakes, or what have you, or the websites, and in particular regards to religious freedom, would they demand a Muslim person to bake a cake or make a website that depicts the image of Muhammad? Because from my understanding, that's frowned upon, if you will, in their religion. So would they, I would want to know from them if they would demand the same thing, because I would think not. But yet, they demand that Christians or even probably Jewish people conform to making their whatever they want.
Well, I think it's really interesting, okay, because I think a couple of things about this. And one is I see a link here to a couple of other cases, actually.
Okay.
I see a link to the student loan case. And I see a link to Roe versus Wade, and I see a link to some other stuff probably as well. But definitely those two because of what you just said. This has already basically been litigated once. So I find it interesting, okay?
Right.
So I think, it's interesting to me that these things just bubble up through the Supreme Court over and over and over again. So that's the first thing that hits me, is
Right.
we've already heard this.
Yeah, and I think because of that, I feel like the outcome is fairly predictable.
Absolutely. I think it's fairly predictable.
I imagine in June or whenever we'll hear that they will side in favor of
the individual.
Yeah, the individual with the website.
Of course, because of our Constitution.
Right.
Of course.
Because people aren't just religious in their churches and in their homes. They're religious
here's what I'd
all
like to
day
say.
and all the time and all throughout their life.
Here's what I'd like to say about it, because I sort of get the liberal point of view, because let's just say you took strictly a business point of view.
Sure.
Okay? Business.
Mm-hmm.
Dollars and cents. Black and white.
Right.
Why would you not make the cake?
Yeah.
Why would you not make the web? Of course you would. It's a paying customer.
Right.
You want that money. You're driven by the dollar. He's driven by the thrill of the sale.
That's right.
That's what you want. You want somebody who wants to make money. You want to make money.
Right.
But it's like you were just saying. It's deeper than that, isn't it?
Yeah, for some people.
And you cannot, not you as a customer, with your dollar is not a gun.
Right.
You cannot coerce me, even with your dollars.
Right.
You can't coerce me to do things that are against my religion. So it's a pure First Amendment test. I see why it's going up to the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that it should have to go so far, because it's really kind of cut and dry, isn't it?
Yep.
You can't force me to do it with a gun. You can't force me to do it with a dollar.
It's pretty simple.
Why does that have to be written out into the record in black and white? Why do people not understand this stuff?
Right. Yeah. I don't get it.
I don't get it either. It's all about that force, though.
Right.
But see, that's what I'd want to argue if I were in the court. I'd say, well, if this guy came and put a gun to my head and said, make me this cake, would that be illegal? Oh, yeah. Well, it wouldn't even have to go to the Supreme Court, of course. Illegal. Okay. Well, can you turn a dollar into a gun? No.
Right.
So why are we here? What's it matter that he's a paying customer? Of course I want to be in business, but I want my business to benefit my community. I want it to benefit things that I agree with. I'm not going to be coerced into doing things that I don't agree with.
Right.
Just because I'm in business.
Yeah. They wish to have their business in harmony with their values.
Yes, and their life, and yes, their religion, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank God that this is America.
Exactly. All right. Well, next, real quick, we'll get to.
Does that lead to Title 42?
It can. Yeah. Speaking of Supreme Court, then I guess the Title 42 is going to be, I guess, ruled on by the Supreme Court at some point. I heard recently.
Well, what's the question? Whether or not it's in the president's power, or?
I guess so. I haven't really gotten the chance to look at what the actual question is, because I assume it was Trump who instituted it, and it would make sense that Biden can get rid of it.
Well, they're just letting it expire.
Right.
I wonder. Well, let's just talk
I think
about
this is
that.
what it
If
is.
it's just expiring.
Some of the states are trying to keep it implemented
Oh, I
to
see.
control
They're
the border.
suing the federal government. I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
I got you.
Right. Yeah.
But let's just ask this then. Unless you have a better point to go on, my question would be, do you expect to see big spikes in the, rate of people coming across the border?
Yeah, I would. It makes sense that there would be a spike, and people are already expecting there to be.
Well, I would too, and I'll mention to you, there's a fellow that I like to listen to called Don't Walk Run on YouTube, and he recently did an analysis of this that said, because some of the border crossing numbers were so bad, that they changed some of the rules about who they can let in on green cards and who they can let in, and what kind of numbers they can let in for this reason or that reason, because they're trying to say, okay, well now we're letting in like 400,000 people a year under this category, right? And so they don't count as illegal border crossers anymore. They're trying to like shuffle around like how they categorize stuff and what numbers people are going to fall into and stuff like this. Well, if they're already doing that because the numbers are so bad, even with Title 42 in play, that's all I can think is imagine what the numbers are going to look like after 42 expires.
Right.
I mean, they'll be off the charts.
Well, one of the reportings I've heard is that they're getting so many coming in that they're not even like doing background checks or something like that.
I don't see how they could.
Yeah.
I saw a report that said like in one day they had like 100,000 people cross.
Right.
In one day.
Well, I can do you one better. Tom Cotton is on air saying an estimated 5 million in the last year.
5 million in a year.
Yeah. So that's outrageous. And one of the things that...
But it's only a matter of time before it shows.
Oh, yeah.
At some point, I'll tell you something. It's a famous quote, okay? Richard Wright. He wrote in his book, in a novel called Native Son, he asked the question, who knows when some slight shock will destroy the delicate balance between social order and thirsty aspiration? And that's all it'll take. I mean, imagine, because you know what they talk about, the status quo, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, you get to a certain point. Malcolm Gladwell, who we studied in college, called it the tipping point.
Yeah.
You get to a certain point, and it's, the gates of hell have been opened.
Right.
No going back.
Right. Well, I think that's part of the reason why some of these states are suing to keep Title 42 in, to at least have some control of the flow.
I think the question would come down to who implemented Title 42 then.
Yeah.
Where did it originate from? Because the states, it sounds to me, because you and I both agree, I think it was a Trump thing.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think the states have any power.
I don't either. It seems more like a stalling thing.
Yeah,
because right now it's supposed to stay in place until the Supreme Court rules. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
they're always kicking that can, aren't they? It's
that's
amazing.
What I was about to say. It just buys more time.
Yep. It's one of the biggest government strategies.
Yeah.
They don't love it now.
Right.
We'll kick it down 2 years from now. Maybe they'll forget all about it.
Well, one of the things that drives me crazy is that Mayorkas is out there even saying to his own border patrol that he hasn't said the border's closed. Because they're asking him why he's out there saying the border's closed when it's clearly not. But Mayorkas says, I haven't said the border's closed. Which is a lie. And I can't believe that. Well, I can't believe it. That the administration is just lying to their own people. And they act like this isn't a problem. Because Joe Biden was recently in Arizona at the big chip plant they're supposed to be building. And he was asked why he's not going to the border. And I don't have his exact quote, but I think he said it's not a big issue. Or there are bigger issues going on. I think that might have been it.
Well, and I've heard him say, we've been to the border.
Yeah.
We've been to the border.
Yeah, that too. Sure.
I don't know who's we. Yep. Kamala, the real president? Right. The real president went to the border, you guys.
She went to Europe. She hadn't been to Europe, but she went to Europe later.
It's kind of crazy because the guy doesn't even know where he is half the time, so I don't know.
Yeah, the border's a mess. I hope
the country's a mess.
Oh, yeah. I guess so. But I guess with that, I don't have any other topics because I pretty much nailed the ones I'd come up with before we came down.
I don't have much to say either, except it is Tuesday, December 20th, and I guess we would wish everybody and they mama a Merry Christmas.
That's right. We wish everybody have a great Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and be on the lookout for our annual predictions episode coming in January.
Oh, yeah, because we'll have a lot to say, like we always do.
That's right. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, many other platforms. And you can subscribe and follow on YouTube.
That's right. You can also send us an email.
Yep, you can find the email addresses in the show notes.
And you can always check out our website, contemporaryconservative.net, for some great other material. There's some other stuff up there. You could definitely check that out. And as always, thank you for listening.